The real risk to life is when people are asleep. It is absolutely astonishing that people simply do not wake up, even if the fire is in the same room that they are in.
I mean, I know a little bit about your business already because we've had a look around. So I really wanted to give you another platform to share the story post the second part of the building. And post COVID-19, where Kiwis are really interested to hear about local manufacturing and what we're doing. And your story is awesome because of the automation and the high tech component, and a lot of that is because of the reinvestment you kept put on back into the business. Which that when we last met, that's what struck me, was that a lot of people will take money out as they go, or take as much as possible out and then sell it, where your approach has been very different from the get-go. And what put you along this path to want to continually to reinvest into Pertronics?
Sure. Well, I'm an engineer by training and by inclination, and so the technology interests me, the fascination of manufacturing interests me, and I mean, it's overstating a bit if I say that the business obviously has to make money, but one of the most fantastic things you can ever do is if you have a hobby that makes money. And so I enjoy it for the challenge, and obviously it provides me with an income, which is great. And so a business always has to be profitable, but I think it's somewhat different from someone who goes into a business purely to maximise the profit. I enjoy what I do, and so very, very happy to run it that way.
And with high technology, there is quite a lot of investment required, isn't there? Because technology doesn't stand still, and even within the fire protection systems part, there's always new things you can be doing with new PCB boards or new capacitors or new programming languages. What's been the thing that has, with your engineer mind, has really impressed you the most, maybe over the last couple of years, and enabled you to launch a new F-series fire protection unit?
Sure. Okay. Obviously the availability of electronic components, in particular, for example, the colour liquid crystal display screens are now far more available than they were, say, 10 or 15 years ago, and the advent of cell phones and tablets has meant that the manufacturing processes for those screens has become extremely widespread, and so they're now much more affordable and usable. So that, for example, we can make our fire alarm control equipment with an LCD screen, so that anyone who has any modest knowledge of the building or the system can read what's going on, rather than having some extremely abbreviated display, which most people can't read unless they really are familiar with the system. So we've been able to provide a lot more information for the building managers and for the fire service when they arrive.
And it sounds like a small thing, but when the heart's going because there's smoke coming out of a window, or there's perceived risk for those fire brigade personnel, or for the building manager, it might be someone that's on a second shift or doesn't have familiarity. Being able to visualize because you have these things called fire maps, don't you, where you look, there's the building, here's a fire map, you can see which part of the building your network system is raising an alarm at. Is that how it works?
Yeah, that's an extension of the system, and that you can just have a standalone fire alarm control panel with a relatively small screen on it. But in addition to that, for big network systems, you can then have a computer-based map of the building. So, for example, a shopping mall, it means you can have this information available, and people can see the location of the incident without having to have detailed knowledge of the building.
So it's always about making the system more usable, because more usable makes it, I guess, more safe, because in your industry, time is really of the essence, isn't it? If there's an alarm that goes off, you want to know where it's gone off and what it might be. what are the overall? What are all the different aspects that your system now protects against?
Well, if we go back in time, fire detection systems typically, well, in fact, go back even further, a very, very basic system might be a straight evacuation system with manual core points. The next step up would be, say, heat detectors, so that you, if there's enough heat in the room caused by a fire, that will trip the system. And if you go back to the 1960s and 70s, those were the dominant systems. But since 1980 and onwards, smoke detector technology has improved. So the smoke detectors are much more widespread. Now, smoke detectors give a way, way faster response than a heat detector. If a heat detector operates in a room, it means you really do have quite a major fire in the room. But a smoke detector can trigger just with some minor events, such as a burning piece of paper and a waste paper basket. So, big difference in fire response. In fact, if you want to be a wee bit flippant about it, you can say a heat detector protects the building, namely it alerts you to a fire, but it won't save the contents of the room, whereas a smoke detector will enable you to attend to the fire while it's still very small and confined to the room. And this matters particularly in sleeping situations, so that the serious risk of fire is if people are asleep. And so a smoke detector can alert people and allow them to evacuate the building or attend to the fire in a way that, say, a simple heat detection system will do. So that's been one of the changes over the last probably 20 odd years, has been the much more widespread adoption of smoke detectors.
What are some of the buildings or commercial structures that your Pertronic systems currently protect?
Sure. Okay, well, I guess the flagship one in recent times was that we have just installed a very, very large system in a motorway tunnel in Australia. It's called the M4E tunnel, which links Homebush through to Parramatta. And there are 93 fire panels linked on a network system. And this provides protection for the motorists in the tunnel. If that system triggers, it triggers a water deluge system and keeps people safe, because there have been some very unfortunate tunnel fires over the years, and people have died in tunnel fires. And so motorway tunnels are now protected by water deluge systems, but something has to trigger the system. And so we have this system in the M4E tunnel in Sydney. And we're very proud of that one, because in fact it would have been the biggest fire protection job in Australia in the last 2 or 3 years. So we're very pleased to have been chosen to supply equipment for that project.
So with almost 100 fire panels in that tunnel, how much roading are we talking about that's in that tunnel?
I think from memory there was something like, it might have been about 9 kilometres. Essentially, each of the systems protects about 100 metres, so that it means there is enormous redundancy, so that if one part of the system was out of action for any reason for servicing, you still have got protection in the rest of the tunnel. So it's a very big network system. We could have installed it with a smaller number of fire panels, but obviously by having a network system, it means you have an enormous fault tolerance.
Now, with a client like that, or implementing a solution like that, how do you get on being a company from New Zealand when there are plenty of other fire detection systems out of America or out of Europe or even out of Australia itself? What makes Pertronics, or how did you win that deal?
Sure. Okay, well, the only way you win deals like that is by having branches in Australia. So we do have a branch a small branch in Adelaide, a bigger one in Melbourne, another one in Sydney, another one in Brisbane, and also a branch in Perth. So you do have to have local people on the ground, and certainly the Australian clients are totally happy to regard us as part of an Australasian operation. There are 2 fire detection manufacturers in New Zealand, and there's only one in Australia. Everything else is imported. So, in terms of locally made, there are only 3 companies operating in the Australasian area.
And you've been around for some time, and that I was just refreshing my mind of when you actually started. And it said 1982, and then 1986 for the fire protection system. So that's 34 years. How much of your growth has been driven by the regulation side versus how much is driven by commercial building owners wanting to protect their asset?
Okay. It is pretty much driven by regulation. The building owners do have an interest in protecting the building, but on the other hand, a lot of people would be totally happy if they were just covered by insurance. But life safety is a bit more than that. So in our industry, it is regulation driven. I mean, the classic, of course, is that lifeboats on ships. The Titanic only had enough lifeboats for half the number of passengers, and it was only after the sinking of the Titanic that regulations were passed to require lifeboats for everybody. And so fire safety is something that is required by legislation, but people, if I'm being a wee bit unkind, will give lip service to it, but invariably they take the view it's not going to happen to them. But obviously life safety is a bit more than that. So we are very much driven by life safety regulations. And obviously, of course, people don't have to choose equipment made by us. They do have other vendors to choose from. So it certainly is a competitive business. We have to compete against other people supplying this equipment. But like I said, there are 3 local manufacturers, local using the term Australasia, but we're also competing against imported equipment, whether it's made in the USA, whether it's made in the UK, or in fact, a number of US branded equipment is actually made in China. So these are the companies we are competing against.
Does it give you an advantage knowing that, as a New Zealand company, or as you said, as an Australasian company, that you know the local regulations, or are you able to configure your system to work, when I say configure, design to the building code in any country around the world?
Sure. Okay. It certainly gives us some advantage because we are local. It means that we are able to customize our equipment in a way that a big US multinational would be reluctant to do. So there is automatic fire detection systems do have to be tailored to the building that they're going into, and so we are able to be much more flexible in terms of the tailoring of the system to the requirements of the building. Some of the big multinationals have a rather more take it or leave it approach, and this certainly helps us in that we're able to customise, whereas others are reluctant to do so. The other point is, of course, that because it's locally made and locally supported, it means that we're in a much better position to support the product. Big multinationals are very reluctant to change their products for a relatively small market. And I do remember meeting a UK manufacturer in Australia once, and he was there for a trade show, and said, how do you guys go in Australia? And he laughed and said, we're not in Australia. And I said, why not? He said, the market's too small. So so from a UK company's perspective, Australia was too small. So that helped put me in my place.
Hey, just a quick interruption. Thanks for watching a Kiwi original. If you're liking this episode, then hit the notification button, and that means you'll see when every new episode gets released. We've done 40 already. We've got another 50 lined up. Right, now back to the episode. Isn't it fascinating though that an entire country can seem too small for someone else, and yet for us, Australia is a large export market, and enables a company like yours to employ. How many people do you employ now, David?
Okay, we're in our operation here in Wingate, which is just north of Wellington, just north of Lower Hutt. We've got 118 people here. We have 4 people in Auckland and about 25 in Australia.
And these are high-tech jobs, aren't they? So these are people dealing with software, with hardware, with making the cabinets, everything that's got to be to a very high failure level, or a failure-safe level. Sure.
There is obviously a range of skills. Printed circuit board assembly. We have people who sometimes come to us with experience on that, but sometimes we have to train them, and so we're talking factory process workers. So there's certainly a level of training and skill required, right up to people with master's degrees in computer science.
How easy is it to get those software programmers?
It's not super easy, but it's not impossibly hard either. When we advertise for extra people with those qualifications, maybe if we were in Christchurch or Auckland, we might get 20 or 30 applicants, and here we might get maybe half a dozen suitable applicants. So we've been very lucky. We have been managed to get some very talented people. People come to Wellington for a variety of reasons, and so that I guess in one sense, from a Pertronic point of view, it means there is not quite the same competition, and that there aren't a lot of manufacturers of electronic equipment in the Wellington area. There's more of them in Christchurch and more of them in Auckland, and so maybe we've got less people to choose from, but on the other hand, the people who come and work for us have got less options themselves. So I've got to say, so far we have been very lucky. We've managed to recruit the people we want, and so pretty happy to be based here in Wellington.
It's a good point, isn't it? That if there's some scarcity of resource, it actually pays to be in a place where there's less competition for it. So you might be, well, at least what I think is with some of the university students, not just to look for the cloud software companies, look at some of the manufacturers, because there's some really smart things you can do with software combined with hardware, and I think your organization is an example of that. Now, last time we spoke, when I was out at your Wingate office, there was a building site, and then there was your main office. Has the building been complete, and maybe talk the listeners through why the need for expansion?
Sure. We had certainly reached the limits of our capacity, and from a manufacturing point of view, we really were out of manufacturing space, and we had rented some Portacom type buildings to accommodate extra space, and also in terms of R&D, the R&D crew were all pretty much crammed up. People put up with it, but it was less than ideal, and there was simply no way we could expand without bigger premises. So we made the decision to effectively put up another building alongside our existing building. The existing building was L-shaped, and by joining up with the small part of the L, we turned it into a U-shaped building. So additional production space. We moved the R&D and tech support people over into the new building, and also part of the building was a high bay warehouse. We had also been constrained with our warehouse capability. We did have some rented space adjacent to where we are. Also, we had moved some of our R&D people over to the old Avalon TV studio. There was space available there, and those people, we had part of our R&D team across there. So by putting up the new building, we've now been able to bring everybody back here to the central site. So just fantastic to have everybody under one roof.
Yeah, it's good for team culture too. I remember when you took me through the office, and you're walking in and kind of saying what happens in each of the rooms. People are looking up and smiling at you and smiling at me, and there's a really good team culture, it seemed, at least on my brief visit there. And the other thing that struck me was just how much testing and technology was on that first floor. The amount of, you talk about the tunnels and the 90-something panels. You're always connecting these and seeing, like, pushing the limits of the technology, aren't you, to make sure that you can actually trust that, unlike our home Wi-Fi networks, that these networks don't fail because they're so important.
Exactly. It's everything is about testing. Essentially, that it's got to be bulletproof. When it leaves here. With some other products, if you read all sorts of R&D things, you'll say, fail fast and so on. And sometimes products are put out into the market where there are known bugs, but essentially that's not an option really that's available to us.
I used to work in telecommunications, and we had the limit of either you did 4 nines availability or 5 nines, and 5 nines was 99.999% of it. When I started out in telecoms, I thought, wow, that's pretty much 100%. Until one of the engineers said, no, you go and work it out. You work out what 5 nines is over an entire year. And we did the numbers, and it was 53 minutes of downtime. And I said, well, that's not that much. It's still under an hour. And he said, okay, you go and talk to the sales guys that work in the stock exchange side of it and ask them to tell you what 53 minutes of downtime is. And so I asked one of the guys, and they said, well, at Bank of America, it's $30 million a minute. So you do the maths on that. They just couldn't afford to have that downtime for financial reasons.
Yeah, and the same applies to fire detection systems. Really, downtime is dangerous. Obviously, systems do have to be serviced, got to be worked on, but essentially, systems have to keep going with as close to zero downtime as possible. And we've been in business over 30 years, and there are some systems around that we've made in the early days of the company that are still operational. Obviously, always pretty pleased to see them. I must admit, when my kids were younger, teenagers, we'd go for a walk through the streets of Wellington, and in New Zealand, fire alarm panels but essentially in the window, so that the brigade, when they rock up, can see what's going on. And so I used to annoy the kids massively by stopping and looking at all the fire panels as we walked along the street. So some people, I've got 3 daughters, and the young ladies might stop and look at dresses and shop windows, but I stopped and looked at fire panels.
Especially when they're your own and you can read and see how they're going. You actually got me a little bit addicted too to I've started looking for a couple, and I found one just off Marjorie Bank Street in Mount Vic. There's a 4-story apartment block there. There's a Pertronics down below, and you can see sometimes there's a green light, sometimes there's a red light. I think the green light's the right one. But correct. That's one of your alarms. In terms of the next stage of building evolutions, you see some of these massive skyscrapers that are being created, some up to a kilometre tall they want to get. Is there any limitation from a fire protection perspective on the types of buildings you can protect? So if someone in Dubai wants to build the next tallest building, is that something that Pertronics could bid for if they came to you?
Sure. Well, we I make the point. We do the detection side and the evacuation side, evacuation warning systems, and so the size of the building doesn't matter, because I mentioned, of course, the tunnel with 93 network panels. Now, even for the highest building on the planet, you still wouldn't need 93 fire panels. And so it just means that what we've done horizontally can be done vertically. So the issue really from a fire safety point of view for those super high-rise buildings is controlled evacuation. How do you get everybody out? How do you get 10,000 people out of a building safely? And this is really moving into the fire engineering area. You may have intermediate water storage so that you can fight the fire at intermediate levels, things like that. But that's over and above what we do. Our place in it is detecting the event and being able to sound the warning. So the whole design of safe evacuation, safe firefighting, and so on. You do degrees in fire engineering, which is somewhat different from what we do.
You must have seen a lot in terms of the actual fires and seeing how damaging they can be, not just for commercial buildings, but for residential and people that don't have smoke alarms. What would be your general message to people around fire safety?
Sure. Okay. The real risk to life is when people are asleep. It is absolutely astonishing that people simply do not wake up, even if the fire is in the same room that they are in. It seems impossible. How could you not wake if the fire is in your room? But people don't. And for the domestic situation, the smoke alarms are absolutely vital. And also, of course, in the commercial situation, hotels are a case where early detection is essential. In New Zealand, office buildings and high-rise have an extremely good safety record. I think I'm correct in saying that in the last 50 years, no one has lost their life in a high-rise office building in New Zealand.
Wow.
Now, that's a combination of things. One is good regulation, good systems, but also that people are typically, if I'm being flippant, awake and sober. And if you're awake and sober, you'll probably get out. But it's where the fire occurs at night. And of course, there was a tragedy in the UK, Grenfell Towers, where 2 o'clock in the morning, and I think there were 200 people in the building at the time. 130 got out, but 70 died. But by contrast, there was a similar fire in Melbourne. It was La Crosse Apartments in the Dockland area of Melbourne. It had one of our systems in it. The system behaved as it should. But once again, 2 o'clock in the morning, similar number of people, everybody got out. And there's a whole raft of factors involved in that. And one is the evacuation procedures in Australia and New Zealand. The philosophy is, if there's an alarm, get out. Whereas some other brigades have a stand and defend philosophy. They try to fight the fire, and regrettably, and it works most of the time, but not always. So it really is the sleeping risk is where the greatest risk is, and that's where smoke detectors are in commercial buildings like hotels and the like are so important, but also smoke alarms in the domestic situation. In fact, there was one that was reported in the Dominion Post quite a few years ago. A young lady in her room, 16-year-old, with candles, fell asleep. It set a light to the curtains in the room there. The room filled with smoke. There was no smoke alarm in the room, but the smoke went under the door and ultimately triggered the smoke alarm in the corridor outside. That woke the rest of the family. They were able to get the young lady out of the room. She survived, but in fact, the house was burnt down and the pets died in the fire. So it was a major fire, and she was very lucky to get out. But once again, she remained asleep, even though the fire was in her bedroom.
Just shows the importance, doesn't it, of protecting not just your home but the people that you love, your family, and in those commercial situations we're really relying on our facilities managers, our building managers, and the fire service. The importance of both regulation combined with reliable technology, and certainly makes me feel better that a company like Pertronics and what we have in terms of regulation in New Zealand is keeping people safe. If, as you say, haven't had a death or a serious injury for 50 years, that's a pretty good stat to go by.
Sure. By the way, I am talking of office situations. I am talking situations where people were awake at the time. Regrettably, and if we go back in time the last 50 years, there have been deaths in rest homes and the like. Since those fatalities, the regulations regarding rest homes and that have been tightened considerably. So this is an example, unfortunately, of regulations tending to follow the tragedy.
Is there anything that you see in the regulations that are lacking, or that would help minimise some of the risks or perceived risks that you see?
The regulator environment is pretty good. There are improvements that could be made, say, in terms of response. For example, it is technically possible when the fire brigade get a signal from an automatic alarm system to know exactly where in the building it is, whether it's a smoke detector, whether it's a manual call point, whether it's a heat detector or whatever, so that before they leave the station, they know what they're dealing with. That's an area where technology could be improved, so that the people who are fighting the fire have got better information while they're on the way to the fire. And in particular, for example, if it was a single smoke detector, then it still has to be investigated, but there is a much greater chance that it will be a false alarm caused by whatever, someone boiling a jug in a room or whatever. But on the other hand, if 3 smoke detectors and two manual call points have been operated, then it's extremely unlikely that it's a false alarm.
And it's giving those firefighters those critical minutes when they're in the fire truck on the way to actually discuss with each other, all right, we know exactly what type of fire this is, it's significant, or it's just one point, so maybe it could become significant, or maybe it's a false alarm.
And also, it does enable the fire service then, or now Fire and Emergency New Zealand, to make a decision as to how many appliances to send. For a big high-rise hotel, there might be a standard call-out of 4 appliances. Now, that's obviously having 4 appliances racing through busy streets. There's a risk factor involved, but also it means that if an event occurs somewhere else, those appliances are tied up going to that event. And so better information to the brigade before they leave the station means that the response could be calibrated according to the seriousness of the event.
It's a very good point, and I think you've brought up a lot of very good points today, and probably for a lot of the audience who are listening to this, they're hearing for the first time some of the technology behind those little red panels that you see, and when you flick that switch or smash the glass, or it's probably plastic now, what happens as a result of that? Because a lot of the times we see those in rooms, but God forbid we never have to actually use it. So really appreciate what you're doing to keep not just New Zealanders safe, but buildings all around the world. A life is a life, so if you've got lots of people congregating in that area, that's increases the importance of it, no matter what type of business it is. David, thank you very much for your time today and for being so generous with the information around Pertronics and all of the fire detection systems that you do and some of the technology around it. And also thank you on behalf of New Zealand for investing back into New Zealand manufacturing. It's an optional thing. You didn't have to do it. And just actually implementing and building that new building shows that you're not done yet, that there's plenty more that future in this and growth. And I just want to thank you on behalf of the Buy New Zealand Made campaign for the jobs, the people you're employing, and the difference you're making.
No, thank you, Ryan. No, I enjoy it. I'm an engineer. I enjoy the technology. I enjoy the challenge. Pretty much most days I look forward to coming to work in the morning.
As long as it's 4 out of 5, that's a good week in my books.
Absolutely. Hopefully it's better than that, but there we go. Yep.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, and I look forward to sharing this. This has been a Kiwi original brought to you by the New Zealand Made team. Thanks for watching. The New Zealand Made trademark is used by over 1,200 businesses in New Zealand. The New Zealand Made team licenses that trademark. Check if you're eligible at bynz.org.nz. If you feel that someone should see this, share it with them now. Otherwise, subscribe to youtube.com/bynzmade, and we'll see you on the next episode.